Hey there everybody, Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to a brand new show here on the channel called Iconic Band Lineups. We're here at the brewery at Orange County Hops in Walden, New York. Sitting next to me, of course, is Dr. Michael Antonelli. What's going on, my friend?
How you been, buddy?
I've been good. Folks haven't seen you in a little while.
All this craziness. Well,
Yeah.
you went big time on me,
Oh,
So I had to wait for my turn with all the famous guests you've had. If you guys haven't checked them out, he's got some real heavy hitters coming in, and I feel slightly inadequate now as a guest with all those heavy hitters you got going on there.
Not at all. Mike is one of my favorite guests because he's so knowledgeable about music and he plays music and it's like nobody better to have on this show, and specifically this show because actually Mike is the one who inspired this new topic theme called Iconic Band Lineups, because back a couple of months ago and probably throughout most of this pandemic, every time I saw Mike, he's listening to Led Zeppelin. And he's talking about Led Zeppelin. He's loving it. And Mike is, 90% of the time, mostly a jazz guy. But here he is listening to Led Zeppelin. Every time I see him, and he says to me, he goes, when are we going to do a show on Led Zeppelin? I said, well, Mike, I've actually done a couple shows on Led Zeppelin. He goes, well, we should just do a show where we just talk about how great they are and those guys. And I'm like, you know what? Why don't we do a show that's kind of like where we talk about like iconic lineups, where you have 4 guys or 5 guys or 3 guys or gals or whatever who made up a lineup that everybody knows about them as individuals. Each member was so important to that group, and you take any one of them away and it's not quite the same anymore. Mm-hmm. And who better to start it off with than Led Zeppelin? And this is less of a do research and have a discussion type of show, but more talk about this band, why we love them, and why, in this instance, all 4 of those guys were so important to this band, and each one of them such a legendary musician.
Yeah.
And how together they made magic happen in that band.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of like the history of kind of putting together a show like this. So now it's just time for Mike and I to talk about Led Zeppelin and what makes them so great, or what made them so great.
So as I always do to you, I'm going to just back up for a minute.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
I just want to throw in just a little piece of history here, just to back up, just to give a little preamble to this. Of course, Led Zeppelin is not only an iconic band, but they are one of the iconic British bands.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about the most famous of best-selling of all time to come out of England during the 60s was, of course, the Beatles.
Yep.
And again, you can't have a blueprint, basically, of Beatles music. All 4 guys contributed in multi-different ways, and of course, as they evolved in that short time period that they were together, once they hit the American scene, you think about how progressive they became, and how each one interplayed and brought their strengths to the table. So, the Zeppelin group was a blues-based band, just like they were an offspring of Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton and the Yardbirds. But I think what makes them so unique, let's take another blues-based band like the Rolling Stones, for example, who have got this iconic sound, and they've been around for now, I don't know how many, 60, 70 years.
55, 57, something
I don't
like
know.
that.
I lost track, So, but they're still at it, and they have a different kind of more of a, let's say, a standard-based repertoire. Let's say more of a functional style that they've evolved in, and pretty much they've maintained that same kind of groove throughout that long 50-year history, right?
Yep.
The Beatles, not so much, I think, and Led Zeppelin, as in contrast, Led Zeppelin really resembles to me more of the interaction of like a 4-piece jazz ensemble would have on stage, how they interplay with each other, and they create spontaneously. And once that it happens and it's laid down in the studio, of course, then they have kind of a model to use. But their songs develop out of folk music, out of blues, And half the time, they sound like an acoustic rock band when they're first starting their songs, and the evolution and the track that these songs follow and the way they evolve and the way that all four musicians interact and create this almost interlocking relationship where, let's go right with Bonzo, John Bonham, the great drummer, what he brought to the group and what he added to Jimmy Page's style. The two of them were like, I would call them, like twins on stage, because each one mimicked the other, or not so much mimicry, but supported the other in a way that brought out this polyrhythmic sensibility that was so grooving and so obscure at the time that it influenced an entire generation of musicians, and still to this day, I think their influence goes further and further beyond what we could say is just iconic. I mean, it's more than that. It's one of, I might even call them my favorite band of all time, even being a jazz guy.
Yeah, for favorite rock. Yeah, well,
not a rock band.
Just band
in
general.
My favorite.
And you're not going to get a lot of people who are going to argue that, because I think a lot of people feel that way. And that's down to those four individuals who make up this band. You got to have all four of them here.
Yes.
And what's interesting is you bring up the whole concept of Page, especially if you go look at a lot of live performances of this band from back in the day. Page is always looking at Bonham. Page and Bonham kind of fed off each other. Whereas, a lot of times in traditional rock bands, you have the bass player and the drummer locked in together. They're kind of in the background, whatever, the guitar players or keyboard players and the singers doing their thing. And much like The Who, Townsend and Moon did the exact same thing. Townsend always fed off of Moon and vice versa. And I think Page and Bonham did the exact same thing. And, what to kind of reiterate what you said before, too, a lot of people look at Led Zeppelin and bands like Deep Purple and bands like Black Sabbath and whatnot as the kind of the forefathers of heavy metal. And as loud and heavy as Led Zeppelin could be at times, they were at their core a blues band and a folk band. That's where they came from.
Yeah.
And so much of their music kind of hit on those two different types of styles. And really well, I might add.
I am just amazed at, you said earlier, you mentioned how for a month solid I was listening to nothing but Led Zeppelin. And I am just amazed at how every time I listen to Zeppelin, I can get deeper and deeper into it. And being, someone who is trained as a musician, I get analytical and to a fault sometimes, but that's my hang-up. So much intricacy is going on there at all times. For example, let's take the Houses of the Holy album, where they had Kashmir, right? Now Kashmir it's a polyrhythmic song because the theme, bum da ba dum bum da 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 dum da 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 dum da ba da da dum da ba da bum da ba da. That's in 3, right? It's a pattern of 3. Behind that, Bonham's going boom, 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 boom. So he's playing in 4. So the song is in 3, but he's playing in 4. So they're only lining up every 12 beats. They hit 1 together. Who does that?
Yeah, nobody does that. Yeah.
Well, nobody in the rock idiom, right?
Yep.
So it's that kind of thing. It's the kind of synergy that happens when you have Bonham playing triplets with his bass drum, where most bass drummers are, just making it solid 1 and 3 and 2 and 4 for the backbeat on the snare drum. Bonham's hitting these like a rabbit foot, and he was influenced a lot by the swing drummers like Louis Bellson and Buddy Rich, who were, very technically oriented, very solid rhythmic players. And I think that foundation of having Bonham as the solid foundation really speaks volumes as to why that band captured so many interesting grooves and kept everybody guessing and everybody grooving and not knowing where those songs were going to go. And of course, Jimmy Page with his guitar licks, and let's not forget John Paul Jones, who played keyboards every bit as well as he played bass. What about the recorder solo that he does for Stairway to Heaven in the beginning?
On the Mellotron, yeah.
The Mellotron, right?
Electric piano and other tunes.
Right.
And organ. I mean, he used
right. That Kashmir tune is heavily laden with Bonham and John Paul Jones, as I spoke before.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, it's and I want to go back to something you said earlier about how, like, especially early on, I mean, they were basically, Zeppelin was kind of like a jazz band, and I think, go back even just a couple of years before Led Zeppelin formed, you had Cream at their essence, although a pretty heavy band for the time, were a jazz band. And they performed like a jazz band. All that improvisation. I think if you listen, I recently picked up a bootleg of Led Zeppelin's from the Fillmore West in 1969. April of 1969, they played like a stint at the Fillmore West, and like 60% of their entire set that evening is all improvisations.
Yeah.
And just amazing. And they would change that a bit over the years. I mean, they would jam and improvise less as their career went on, but like early in their career, they were masters at that.
Right. And let's not forget, of course, the vocal style.
Can't forget Percy, right? Robert Plant. I mean,
Robert Plant, who could lull a baby to sleep with some really beautiful, soft, melodic passages, and then imitate screaming and having an orgasm on stage with a whole lot of love.
Yeah,
that was a 20-minute love fest.
Yeah,
on stage. Imagine hearing that in the supermarket now.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah, they do. They play it. Whole lot of love. Yeah. Coming to your local Walmart Supercenter.
That's right.
A whole lot of love.
Whole lot of love
on the music.
The 30-minute live version, right? Yeah. It's amazing what they could do together, and I think that you look at some of their most successful albums, and the ones that are considered the better albums, they were all great, are the ones where you have all four members just contributing together. And I think, like, if I look back on, for me, their least successful solo album is probably the last one they did, which is In Through the Outdoor. And the reason why is at the time, Jimmy Page had a lot of problems. Jimmy was he was in his heroin phase and pretty messed up, and the bulk of the writing and the arrangements on that album were taken over by John Paul Jones, who did a fantastic job with what he had to work with. But the reason that album, at least for me anyway, doesn't work as well as a lot of the other albums is because you're missing that fourth element, right? So you're taking one of those guys out of there who really didn't contribute a lot to that album, and all of a sudden the album as a whole suffers a little bit from it, as good as it still is. Whereas you have, like those first three albums, Zeppelin 4, Houses of the Holy, my Holy Grail album, which is Physical Graffiti, even Presence is a fantastic album. And I just think that album, and that's why when Bonham died, they lost that piece, and they knew it, that they could not continue on without him.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of other bands would have said, okay, this is a horrible tragedy, but you know what, we're still relatively young, we're still the biggest band on the planet, we'll find another drummer and continue on.
Yeah.
And they could not do it.
No, but at least they did give a shout out, and rightfully so, to John's son Jason, and they did an album or a concert in 2007 with Jason Bonham, and
damn good, I might have read.
Very, very, very spot on, and what a great tribute from father to son, or from son to father, either way you want to look at it. That was a really special, and I think the members of the group, at least in interviews post that concert, they've all agreed that that was a special night. And this is one of those bands that finds the zone. As a musician, we all find from time to time that one experience, and it happens when you don't know it's happening, where you're playing and all of a sudden you're not there. You're just so absorbed in what's happening, and the music takes over, and you're just like sitting. It's almost like you're in a dream. You're sitting back and
Like an alternate
listening to
reality
what
or something.
happened, but it's not you.
Yeah.
You're not there, and you're so absorbed that the passage of time, everything stops. It's just, you're in the zone or playing in a state of what's called flow. So I think that band experienced that. Now I'm talking from afar, but just as a personal listener, of somebody who's been in there occasionally in that place, I know they experienced that from time to time, and it's just the music just carries itself, and they're just basically participants as bystanders, not mentally trying, but just experiencing and letting the music take over, and that's a real thing. So.
And we've mainly just hit upon like live performances from them, but like even if in the studio, I mean, how inspired did they sound like on all those early records?
Yeah.
One of the albums, I'd be interested to get your take on it. So one of the albums that when I was younger that I really didn't get into as much of Zeppelin's third album, because the third album is very different from the first two, very different from the fourth. It's mostly acoustic. You got a couple heavy hitters on the album, and I remember early on when I was younger, I was like, this album isn't quite heavy enough. It's very folky, a lot of acoustic stuff. I'm not as into it, but as I've gotten older, I really appreciate that album a lot. So, how inspired do you have to be as young musicians? They were all in their early mid-20s at that point. You make these first two albums, which are bluesy and heavy, and drawing a lot of inspiration from the blues greats and your heroes, and then you make this fourth album that's very kind of personal and pastoral, with all these kind of acoustic textures, and great songwriting from Page on that album, by the way. A couple really heavy rock tunes, but for the most part, just a very kind of like pastoral, folky album. I mean, you got to be pretty inspired to just kind of reach into your bag of tricks after doing two albums back to back that are pretty similar, to then go totally about face and release that, and then follow it up with the fourth album, which takes it to another level. Not many bands can do that. Out of the gate.
They had me at Dazed and Confused.
That was it, right?
The first opening line,
That little walking bass line there, right? That's it. That's all it took.
Right? And then Bonham enters. Boom, that's it. I'm hooked. I'm already hooked. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's just it's an incredible catalog, incredible musicians, and like I said, I don't think, and they were lucky throughout the course of their career. Maybe when you look at it, so what they formed in late '67, early '68. By 1979, they're done. A lot of bands, like other iconic bands, were around a hell of a lot longer. They were around a hell of a lot longer than others. You look at them next to Cream, and Cream's career is like microscopic compared to Zeppelin's, but I can't imagine could you imagine in 75 if John Paul Jones left and they just got another bass player? It doesn't work, right?
No.
It doesn't work. You have to have that lineup.
No.
So
no. I mean, it is as an iconic lineup as the Beatles, and as we said before, as the Rolling Stones, who, let's face it, out of bands that are tribute bands, the style of the Stones is a lot easier for most musicians in that genre to imitate. They'll never be the Stones,
right,
but it's a lot easier to imitate that. You got four players in Led Zeppelin that their skills, as far as proficiency and original sound, their voices are so unique, that it's almost one in a million, as opposed to one of a million.
Yeah.
People who've got the talent, and that don't really don't get the chances of the success. Well, maybe it's because that this group of musicians were really they're soulmates musically, meant to be together, and they're so gifted in their own individual ways that when you put that together and it forms a cohesive unit, I can listen to them. I'll be listening to them, to the day I check out of this planet.
I mean, I think,
I will.
Yeah, I think most people in a certain age group feel that way. And whether, like, you know, a lot of people like come to me and they're like, you know, well, where does Led Zeppelin sit on your list of favorite bands of all time? And I have a couple other bands that I like more, right? Just because. But I love Led Zeppelin. And you know what? Are they a top 10 band for me? Hell yeah, they are. Right? And does it matter that maybe I like Deep Purple and Black Sabbath a little bit more? No. It doesn't lessen my appreciation for their music and those four guys as a unit, right? So, well, in kind of closing, favorite Zeppelin song, favorite Zeppelin album?
Oh, I hate when you do that to me.
Everybody does. You're on the spot.
Yeah.
You couldn't prepare.
Can we do an ad for Berklee College of Music? Where
No,
I went
you
to
can't.
School instead?
Sorry, you don't get off that easy. You can name a couple. You don't have to. You can name a couple.
All right. Well, you know, it depends. That's a very hard question for me because I love it all. I listen to the whole catalog, and every week, for me, it's a different song. I'm gonna have to say Kashmir, probably, is what, and of course off that album, Houses of the Holy, there were several great songs. But I mean, I like the Rain song.
The Rain song is beautiful.
I mean, how that evolves, and it starts out one way, it's a folk song, and the next thing it's a hard rock, and it goes into a I forget the name of it, or it ends with the Rain song, but there's like a whole melody, a medley. But you know, the popular favorite and the one that skyrocketed them to stardom, the Stairway to Heaven, it doesn't grow old with me for some reason, you know. And I mean, and sometimes I have to take a back seat and not listen to it for a while, but when I come back to it, it's because I'm ready.
Yeah.
And I'll hear something in it that I didn't hear the first 1,379 times that I heard it. Who's counting?
There's a bald eagle over there flying over the trees.
Wow.
I'm sitting there, I'm like, wow, you don't see that all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, well, the farmer just cut the hay today.
Yeah.
There he comes.
Here he comes. Is that a bald? No, maybe it's not a bald eagle, no. It's a hawk.
It might be a hawk.
Yeah, okay.
Still beautiful.
He's beautiful, yeah. Sorry, guys. We were out, we have a gorgeous farm field over here, so we're at outside in the patio area. Yeah, it's a red-tailed hawk. Yeah, he's pretty big, though. Yeah, well, I mean, you know, I've done top 10 song show on Zeppelin. I've done like ranking the albums and stuff. So for me, like Physical Graffiti is just unbelievable. It's like probably the greatest double album, studio album that was ever released, in my opinion. It's got everything that made Zeppelin so great on that album. Every little facet of their playing is on there. The folk is on there. The straight ahead rock and roll, the heavy rock, the blues. It's all on there. A little bit of psychedelia. Favorite song, I mean, that kind of changes all the time. I think whenever I did the top 10 song show, it was probably at least a year ago, and I think I picked The Rover, which is a great song off of Physical Graffiti, but man, there's so many good ones. I love Dazed and Confused. I love Black Dog.
Yeah.
I love The Immigrant Song. I mean, there's so many great...
Well, me too. Can I change my pick?
Yeah, you can change your pick. Because I mean, that's the kind of band they are, right? You could literally every day you could say something different. Yeah. And that just goes to show you the strength of the catalog.
It's just a great ensemble, and it's just been fabulous to be able to talk about them and get that out there.
Yeah. So there you have it, guys. I mean, that iconic lineups doesn't get much better than Led Zeppelin for our first episode, and you know, I announced the show a couple of days ago, and people are like, I hope you're going to do Cream, and I hope you're going to do Rush, and yeah, those are on tap, because I mean, you
Rush
think about
what they accomplished with just a three-piece
just the three
group.
Guys, it's yeah.
And again, uniqueness of their contributions. Again, you go back to the drummer and the vocalist. Hard to match those voices anywhere on the planet for what they did.
Absolutely. And Mike and I, when we were talking about doing this particular episode on Zeppelin, I challenged him. I said, you know what? We got to take a jazz route on this series as well. So, Jesus, already, I just got bit by something. Yeah,
that was a bee.
Yeah. So I challenged Mike. I said, you know, maybe best Miles Davis lineup, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, I mean, a lot of ways you can go here. So anyway, there you have it. iconic band lineups. I am Pete Pardo. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on YouTube all the damn time. Mike, thanks for having us here at the brewery at Orange County Hops once again.
Thanks for inviting me to be part of your wonderful show. I really appreciate it.
I love having you. So we'll be back with more episodes of this in the series. So stay tuned. Let us know what you think. And take care, everybody. Bye-bye.